It's this phenomenon that life is exactly that. No more, no less. The constant realization of self-production. It's a flow of material. This cat is eating. It lives as an autopoietic system, just like this child climbing a tree, or just like someone who's got to get up early or turns off their alarm clock in the morning. All of them conserve life as part of an autopoietic system. It means that we are closed networks of molecular production that exist in the continuous production of themselves. If we ask about ourselves, we have to realize that we are part of that continuous production circle. We are within life. We are in the life that we live by asking questions about that life. When we talk of biology, of cultural biology, then we understand this differently. We think that this is close to the stuff we learned at school. Biology, we know, has to do with molecules, with digestion, with anatomy. But what is the nature of the biological, really? What exactly is it? Well, everything is biological, which is happening, and which entails the realization of at least one living being. That is what a biological phenomenon is. Everything is in the middle of development, and that means that a living being is alive. It's a biological phenomenon which doesn't occur when we're not alive. But here in such a conversation, we need at least two people to be alive for it to work, or several people, so please don't all leave. As living beings, as human living beings, what actually mobilizes us in our life? Is it reason or emotions? We will leave that question for now. What motivates us? Is it emotions or reasons? Why are you here? Because of reason or because of emotions? We'll see. Why do we do what we do? Is it because of emotions or because of reason? On to the soul of the third reflection, the origin. When did humanness first arise? To begin with, we said that we were speaking of humanness as if we meant the same thing by this. But we want to enter into a reflection in order to find out the difference between humanness arising. It's interesting to talk about this in order to find out what really makes us human, why we care about certain things. Why are there things that surprise us and others that bother us? Why does that happen to us? We're not going to be talking about all this in any detail, but we want to at least reflect on how we first came about, how we as humans first arose back in history. And that, of course, is an explanation of the processes that have happened back in our history, in our evolutionary history, so that we were able to become what we are now. So we need to look back in our evolutionary history to ask whether there was natural selection or natural drift. Natural selection or natural drift? Well, generally speaking, everyone will know the answer to that. Natural drift perhaps isn't quite so well known as natural selection. Natural selection, let's take that notion first. When we use that concept, we have the idea that survival, or the differentiated survival and the adaptation to a changing community is the result of competition. It's a history of competition. The fittest will survive. The situation of a history of competition is particularly interesting. The fittest survives, that means the one who is best adapted. In the closer sense of the word, that shouldn't be surprising. When Darwin first searched for mechanisms to explain human beings and to explain their relationship to circumstances, he was looking for that very mechanism and process, and the result was diversity and adaptation of organisms to different circumstances. English economists back in that time assumed that selection was equal to competition. So selection, this concept, according to the English scientists at the time, meant that you picked a dove which was going to be the best one in a process also involving curiosity and diversity of organisms in order to find out who was best. But for that you need a mechanism, and that mechanism is competition. And the result of that competition is life in all its diversity. Well, I, as a person breeding doves, performing selecting, I do that because of competition. And of course there's also natural selection, rather than me as a breeder doing the selecting. And if you compare it to other organisms, you'll find that the fittest always survives. And as part of that evolution, psychological space was conserved, an emotion that we still have today. We live in a culture which is based on subjugation, competition, and competing with one another. So winning is part and parcel of our everyday lives, but winning also implies losing, because there can't be a winner without a loser. In a competition, in a soccer game, you've got to have winners and losers. And if we're not interested in whether there are winners or losers, then of course it's not a game, it's not a competition. So we have to bear that in mind. Now then, natural drift. Natural drift means that the life of an organism is like a flow. It's a continuous change between conserving life and adaptation. Life arises from a steady interchange between different circumstances. Imagine a skier just going downhill, passes the trees kind of float past him. He has a sort of balance, but he also tries to consciously ski around any obstacles. So that process means keeping a balance in the flow of skiing downhill. That's what is meant by natural drift. It refers to the fact that you let yourself drift as if you were in a boat where you can't set a course. You are sort of drifting along. I can't do anything because I don't know where I want to sail to. But the Coast Guard knows exactly where the boat will end up, because the Coast Guard knows the drift, knows the currents. It's the circumstances in which the boat finds itself that are important. But the person in the boat can't say anything, can't preset the course of the boat. So organism and circumstances change together coherently. And the story of living beings is one of constant adaptation and of constant change in the relationship between organism and niche. And if adaptation is not being conserved, then it will die out. There's an inner dynamic which began the moment we were born. We were born, we have carried on changing until we became today's adults. We changed ourselves, but also our relational framework has changed within which we've developed. That, again, would not be terribly surprising. When you come home, for example, to your parents' house and your mother says, "Listen, my son, I have a whole list of things here," then you might well be surprised